So, hello there. This is day 15 of my alternative spring tour. And today I'd like to introduce journalist Danielle Mustarde. Mustarde?
Hello. Mustarde.
Sounds so glamorous.
It is, yeah, glamorous.
And Danielle interviewed me for DIVA magazine in 2017 after I brought out my first album. So I invited her to take part in this crazy little tour of mine, and she very kindly said yes, along with a number of other people. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I brought my wine.
You did. I sadly left mine upstairs, which is a terrible decision. But, you know, as it's lockdown life, upstairs is my girlfriend's office, so I can't possibly go back now.
I know.
So it's all over. But next time I'll bring some wine. But yes, we did chat back in 2017, which seems an awful long time ago now, which is wild. So it's lovely to be back. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be part of this. And yeah, I know today we said we'd maybe talk a little bit about some of the themes that we touched upon in our interview back then. Including sexuality and bits and bobs and prejudice and love and things like that. So I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about the London town chapter. I know you described it as kind of like a good days, tough times, but a lot of fun. And it really sounded like a lot of fun as well. And I wondered if you could just kind of paint a bit of a picture.
Too much fun, actually.
Too much fun. Well, you know. But I wondered, if you could just give us or give the listeners or the viewers a little bit of a taste of the kind of the heart of that chapter and what it kind of portrays.
Well, I lived in London for 25 years. So I first of all went down to London in 1978 to university. So I was at uni for 4 years. And then I started my career in the fitness industry, which lasted for 21 years. Mm-hmm. And I started my little climb up the very greasy pole. There wasn't really a fitness industry, to be fair, in the early 80s, but I had some great jobs and climbed that greasy pole and lived life to the full, probably.
It sounds like it.
I think that, probably what you want me to get to is that also this was the early 80s. And having fallen in love for the first time with a woman, which was unrequited love, when I was still 18, 19, back at home, and then managed to make the escape to college, I sort of, I had boyfriends, I love men, I love women, I love people. I don't...
Me too.
Wasn't particularly exclusive in those days.
Indeed.
And also, the reality is that I wasn't really sure, as many people aren't, whatever age they are actually sometimes, what direction I wanted to go in. And I didn't feel also that I had to pigeonhole myself, really. But it was the early 80s, and it was a very different time to, how things are now, really, certainly for most people. And basically, homosexuality was still frowned upon, really. It wasn't the norm. And actually, if you stepped out of the norm in those days, the consequences would probably be pretty serious for you. And I wasn't overt about my sexuality, and I certainly, maybe that's my nature, but also I didn't want to be because of my career, actually, because I think it seriously would have impacted in a very negative way upon my career. And the reality was that I had various bad experiences with sexual discrimination and things in my very early career. So what would have happened if my employers had known that I was gay? God alone knows, really. Being a woman and things like that. So but yeah, it was I moved around a lot. I had quite a lot of relationships, which were never fleeting, but it meant that I sort of moved around quite a lot in terms of my home life and things like, until I met my partner, Mark, who is my wife now. And we met in, I get this wrong, well, we met 25 years ago, so we've actually nearly been together for 25 years. So that was 1995.
Yeah.
We allowed things to evolve and blossom a little bit over time, and then we bought a home together. That sort of settled me down a bit, I guess, really. A little bit, and more older.
After the fun and wilds of London. Lovely.
Yeah, it was. Look, I loved London, and I think I also say in that section in the book that we moved to Kent 15, 16 years ago, and I love Kent. We moved from Brixton to the Kent countryside, so that was a huge cultural shift.
Wow.
I also gave up a very good job in order to make the move and undertake a big sort of renovation of the house, which was a huge project. So I particularly underwent an awful lot of change in terms of what was going on in my own life and the changes I was making. And one time I was coming back from London on the train, I remember writing something down in my phone, which is that I love Kent, but I'll always be in love with London, and London will always be right in here, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I think that captures the chapter perfectly. I mean, so much of what happens in London is kind of like centers on love, and whether it's these the different relationships that you had or the friendships that you formed, different flatmates. So yeah, I think that's a great way of kind of summing it up.
It gave me, which I think was really, really important. So of course I went down to London to go to university, and it was a sports college that was predominantly a men's sports college. So also keeping your sexuality, you know, even if you had wanted to sort of do something about it, particularly you were closeted, basically. You probably had to stay in the closet. But I think also, certainly once I started working, I felt London gave you anonymity, actually, and sort of freedom to live your life as you wanted to be your real sort of self, actually. And, you know, I didn't, for all that time I was in London, I didn't really go clubbing very much. There were a couple of years maybe in the sort of mid-80s where I did quite a lot of clubbing.
Good. Glad to hear.
All sorts of mischief with lots of friends, but and things, and got into a lot of trouble. But it was just living somewhere like London just allowed you to be whoever the hell you were, really, and to have that, be anonymous, remain anonymous, really, and not feel that that you were being watched the whole time, or it didn't matter so much to me what people thought about me, I suppose, really. But yeah,
definitely. And just before we move on from that as well, I know in the book in those couple of years where you did go clubbing, you also mention the Gateways Club, Gateway, and like I just wondered if you could if you had any kind of vivid memories from that time, because it's such an iconic establishment in lesbi history. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I can, yes, absolutely. I probably spent a lot of time there. 1985, it closed in 1986. I was at the leaving party.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, I was there the day it all closed down, and I had an absolute ball. Now the Gateways, you know, if you think of a nightclub and stuff, the Gateways was just a little dive, really. It was in a basement, little sort of terraced house, almost off a street off the King's Road.
Yeah.
And it was very, very basic and very small. But it was fantastic. And what you did with the Gateways, and there was we used to go from the gateways to places like the Ace of Clubs and stuff, which was where I proper nightclub, you know, with flashing dance floor. They didn't have that, but what you got at the gateways was a real camaraderie, a real kind of sense of, oh, well, I'm going back to the community thing. But of course it was underground, literally, in lots of more ways than one. But you made friends there, and it was a place you'd know that you could go to, hang out with your mates. It was just a fantastic time. And of course, who used to run it? Smithy was behind the bar, and can't think. Gina ran it. Gina and Smithy, and you know, what characters some of those people. And I actually had quite a long relationship with a woman who was one of their mates. So she was 20 years older than me, and she'd practically lived there. So that also meant that I had to spend quite a lot of time down there. But you know, there were great times, and I don't know really if there was anything like that ever again, to be honest. And of course it was legendary and featured in the killing of Sister George and all sorts of stuff. And some people in that film who, you know, I remember who were hanging out there when I used to go down there. So that's great times.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing to hear a kind of first-hand account. I've read about it a few times. I know there's a new documentary about it that came out recently or is being funded. I'll have to double check the name because her name escapes me, the director. But yeah, if you haven't seen that, definitely seek it out. Yeah, maybe you're in it. Maybe you're in some of the archive footage. Who knows? You might be in the background or something.
Like the bar who wasn't allowed down.
Yeah, propping up the bar with a glass of wine. Grand.
Going in that night or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you're at the closing party as well, that was, you know, lovely. And I know you just mentioned you were dating one of the women that was involved in the scene there. Was that the woman that you nicknamed Auntie in the book?
Was. Well done.
Yes.
Well
Good
done.
maths.
Was.
Good book maths.
As Auntie by other friends of mine because she was so much older than me. But
and I know as well, I mean, another kind of really poignant time in the 80s, obviously living in London through the AIDS crisis as well, and I know there's a really short but touching piece where you mention one of Auntie's flatmates.
I mean, that was yes, this guy, I'm not going to mention names, not that it really matters, it's such a long time ago and things, but yeah, so this girlfriend she lived in a big kind of flat in Bloomsbury with 3 other people, one of whom was this guy who was just such a wonderful man. And it was so I guess it was it must have been around about 85 or 86, and the whole AIDS thing was really still very new, and so we were aware of it for sure, and but it probably wasn't touching our lives. You know, it's a little bit, I suppose, like this current situation really. It does touch a lot of people's lives, but equally it might not, you know, in terms of you having somebody that you know and are close to and have a very personal connection with. Anyway, this particular guy became very poorly very quickly. He was quite promiscuous, but, you know, that's...
Wonderfully so, as you say.
Wonderfully so.
Wonderfully promiscuous.
I say wonderfully promiscuous.
Yeah.
Naughty boy. But, you know, that doesn't mean that anybody deserves, you know, what happens with AIDS. And some might say that it does, but it absolutely doesn't. And he got very poorly very quickly, and he was in King's University College Hospital. And I went to see him one week, and he was lying there with his oxygen mask on, and we used to love dancing together, either at clubs or in this flat where she lived. And he struggled through his oxygen mask and said, when I come out of here, the first thing we're going to do is go dancing. And sadly, he was dead within a few days, actually, which was the first time that it really affected me or came very close to me, which was really devastating, actually.
Yeah. I bet that's I mean, even just reading it in the book, it sounds like an extremely kind of vivid memory to have of that time.
It was, and also I go back to the sort of anonymity thing and, you know, about sexuality being hidden. And of course, it still has to be for a lot of people in this country, but in other countries and across the world particularly. And which is a terrible, terrible thing, to have to live your life hidden away, whether it's your choice because you don't want to risk retribution. I think I've sort of said that, you know, maybe that was a reason I didn't, apart from career and so on. But also, it was just terrible, actually. So I've lost my train of thought there. So what I was talking about, Paul, I mentioned his name, said I wouldn't. But yes, so he died of AIDS. What I was going to say was that he actually, his family didn't know that he was gay. So actually when he died, it was of pneumonia, which of course was a complication that came out of having AIDS. And that's what it said that he died of. So there was no reference ever to the fact that he'd had AIDS. And his parents went to the funeral and were talking about, our Paul's died of pneumonia and da-da-da-da-da.
Goodness,
and they didn't know the truth. And, you know, that's terribly sad. That is so sad. That somebody could die back then as perhaps they might do these days. And true circumstances of their death aren't known by their closest loved.
Yeah, that's terribly sad. And I guess, you know, having kind of grown up in that era and, you know, at times of your life yourself not being out or not being able to be out or feeling able to be out for different reasons, how does it kind of feel now being able to kind of sit and look at this printed book and your album and, you know, these songs and verses and chapters that do kind of discuss your sexuality? How is that, knowing that, you know, your story is there and it is, you know, it is going to survive and people are able to read it?
It's really interesting that you picked up on that, actually, because when I was recording the reading first cut from the book today, which I posted today, and that's quite revealing in itself. And I do wear my heart on my sleeve, and I personally I'm comfortable with that. And of course, when I was writing the book, you know, I had an editor and so on. So all of these things I spent a lot of time mulling over, and she would censor maybe some stuff that I was writing. Equally, she would try and bring more out. Because at the end of the day, if you're writing a memoir, or a memoir of sorts, as I call mine, then you have got to bare your soul, actually, and you are going to reveal stuff that may come as news to some people who think they know you, or whatever. And I've hopefully tried to do it in a sensitive and respectful way to the reader, as well as to be comfortable with it myself. But actually, when you asked that question, the thing that sprung to mind for me as well about having shared all of this sort of stuff and about sexuality so openly, it reminded me of a quote, and I won't get it entirely right, of Ruth Hunt's, who used to be Stonewall. And she basically said something to the effect that even today, you still feel censored as a gay person or as a lesbian, or she certainly felt that she did, and that really resonated with me. And she used the example of sort of, as you go through the zones on the tube into central London, you're kind of the way that you're censoring yourself changes, or as you're leaving central London going out to the suburbs perhaps. About that whole thing about, you know, allowing yourself to hold the hand of your beloved in public. Now, interestingly, although Marg and I have been together for 25 years, we had a civil partnership in 2006. We changed that to marriage 5 years ago. You know, we've been a couple openly for all of that time, and also within our careers back when we met. I was her first girlfriend, so she didn't have all this kind of prejudice and all these hang-ups. She hadn't sort of lived through that. Now, if she had, maybe it wouldn't bother her, maybe it wouldn't have bothered her. I still have that little thing that Ruth Hunt was referring to, which is that I still sense still, which is crazy, which is completely crazy. And not all the time, but I'm probably always a little bit more reticent than she is to hold her hand in public. Now,
not so crazy.
Well, it's not so crazy, is it? But some may say it is, but it's not. And I think that's just purely because if you grew up, you know, back then in the sort of 80s, where your sexuality was really, you were really realizing what your sexuality was, and you know, and doing something about it, then you were censoring yourself then, and being very wary, whether it was for career reasons or just personal protection, full stop, really.
Yeah.
But that's it's quite interesting, really. But I'm, you know, as I say, I'm very comfortable with what I've done in terms of the book, and some of the songs, even on the first album and on this, are quite, you know, hopefully people like them as songs and appreciate the music and stuff like that. But a lot of them have got a message in them.
Definitely, yeah. No, definitely do. Like, I mean, I remember, I think we mentioned it the first time we chatted. The "Don't Judge Me No More," for example. Certainly, that seems like was that written at a point where you kind of, you know, you felt comfortable, kind of like calling that behaviour out almost.
It was really. I have to say, it was probably inspired more by the very negative responses I had to my illness, which was rather than anything else particularly. But then it sort of got me to thinking about, you know, all forms of discrimination and prejudice.
Certainly.
And you know, how we all, you know, and I'm sure I do from time to time, it's human nature really, make judgments about people without really thinking about the consequences and so on. And, you know, but I think that it is human nature, but then it's how those judgments manifest themselves and what you do about them. So that had certainly got quite a strong message. And I think on this album, although it's perhaps not such a strong message as Beauty of Youth is sort of about and so on, which I have a bit of a beef about.
yeah, I know you've mentioned that before as well, and I guess maybe, you know, heightened by the fact that you did choose to, or you did follow a new path, you know, when you did. Have you had any more? Have there been positive experiences this time around, or has it changed at all? Has it been more positive?
It's all been positive, you know, because it was all very, very unexpected for me to start making albums and things. The first album came out of being ill because I started writing, which wasn't something I planned or that wasn't intended. And, you know, and then the second album with the book and then the exhibition that I just bolted on for good measure has sort of evolved from there. So that was a bit more understandable, really. The first album was something of a surprise to me even. And, you know, the responses have been very favourable. I would still question. Success is a really weird word, and Rosie picked up on saying that, you know, I'd been very successful and everything. But how do you measure success? I mean, it's certainly not about records going off the shelves and things like that. I feel I'm very proud of what I've done, and I feel therefore I've achieved something, and it's about satisfaction and fulfillment and all those sorts of things. But I have had favourable responses and things. In terms of, you know, how different would things have been if I'd have done this when I was younger? And I would certainly suggest that I would have perhaps been more successful in other ways, commercially perhaps, had I been younger. It's, you know, but there we are, it didn't. And it wasn't, you know, and other people have sort of talked about this as a career, and I certainly never intended for this to be a career, even when I, you know, started to sing in public when I was 50, and then I had to stop because of illness, and then the writing started. I don't call it a career. Again, it depends how you define career. For me, a career is something where you can hope to make some form of a living, and I've certainly never done that, and I didn't intend to. So it's a professional hobby, I think, for me. Yeah. And who knows where it'll take me. I mean, I'm just sort of, you know, coasting along, really. Of course, making albums and things is very expensive.
Yes, yeah.
Everything that I've done and everything that I do is self-funded, so that can't go on forever. And that probably can't go on any longer. So, but you can do things in different ways, can't you? So, you know, what's interesting with this tour is that I was supposed to be doing stuff in London and then in Brighton as part of the Brighton Fringe, and that would have cost me quite a lot of money, because I would be paying musicians and paying to gallery spaces and all sorts of things. And actually, now I'm connecting with probably far more people than I might have done in those live sets. Of course, nothing's quite the same as doing something live, especially if it's music and so on, which is wonderful to experience as, you know, a member of the audience and so on. But so I'm doing what I'm doing because it seemed like my alternative tour.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I think also it's the timing for me as well, because it's coming up to a year since I brought out the book and the album. So I wanted to sort of, you know, have a big sort of last hurrah, which would have been in Brighton, and then sort of maybe start moving on from this sort of year of promoting these things, this project. And although I could probably have rescheduled quite a lot of the stuff, I didn't really want to choose to do that. So
yeah.
This came to mind as being another option.
Absolutely. And it's one of the amazing things that's kind of happened at this time. I mean, obviously, largely it's a really tragic, horrible time. But also alongside that, the people are really kind of taking the opportunities to kind of do things like this, and, you know, the kind of connection that people are creating in new ways, or maybe not even in new ways, but just the ways that they're doing it differently because of everything that's going on. It's it's a really interesting time, and it's I'm glad you kept it going. You know, you've managed to.
I've still got a long way
days
to go.
In. You're doing all right.
To go. I've got it's 35 days in total. So, yes. But I've got all my material. You know, I've got my schedule. I keep. I'm letting it be a little bit organic and find its own way a little bit. But and I'm having to create my little movies and things as I go along and stuff. But I kind of I've got my head around, you know, being prepared and planning a little bit in advance, so I'm not suddenly panicking when I'm supposed to be doing something. And you know, it's all those silly little things, isn't it? Like internet connectivity and uploading and downloading and God knows what. So, but it's fun. I'm learning an awful lot actually as well.
Good.
I'm enjoying creating my little videos and so on, and just, you know, being able to share things in a different way actually.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's good, and it's good to hear that you're learning things as well. I was listening to a chat by Elizabeth Gilbert, the author, the other day, and she was chatting about kind of learning new things, you know, as we get older, and, you know, never kind of drawing a line under that. And actually that she had a friend who was, I think it was her 90th birthday. She was, Elizabeth Gilbert was maybe in her 20s, and she'd gone to this 90th birthday party, and the woman there who was telling her about like how she'd become like obsessed with, I can't remember which, like an ancient civilization or something in the last 10 years. And so that was a hobby that she started when she was 80, you know, and she was still learning and things like that. So yeah, it's great to see that you are still kind of creating and learning new things, and kind of setting that example.
You don't, you know, you let things, it's good to just sort of let things take you a little bit sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's what this is certainly doing, you know, in ways that I hadn't anticipated when I came up with the ideas. So
absolutely,
as long as I can chug my way to the end of 35
I'm sure you will. You're still a spring chicken.
To stay with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Lovely. All right. Well, I think I've kept you for a good half an hour now. So I will, although sadly we didn't get to go on to lesbian and bisexual women and their obsession with cats after the sweet young kitten kept me up all night. But
lesbians and cats, hey?
Yeah. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. Forever and always, I think.
It is. I'm going to go up now.
Yes. Yeah. I need to go and check in on mine. She's I could hear her mewing earlier, so hopefully she's okay.
I'm going to go and Google what is it about lesbians and cats.
Okay. But next time we do this, we'll move on to lesbians and cats.
We'll work on the answer.
Lovely. All right. Thank you so much for having me, Jude, and good luck with the rest of the tour.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Take care.
You.
Enjoy the cat.
Yes, I will do. All right. Thanks, Jude.
Bye.